Hey there, laugh, sleepy souls. Welcome back to our cozy corner of the internet where stories meet sweet dreams. Before we dive into tonight's tale, if this little slice of bedtime storytelling has been bringing you some so much needed relaxation, I'd always be over the moon if you could hit that like button and maybe even subscribe. No pressure, of course, laugh. So just like only if my stories have truly been resonating with you. And hey, I'm super curious about where you're tuning in from. Drop a comment letting me know your city and what time it is for you right now. It feels so much more personal when I know I've got friends all around the world winding down with me. Now it's time to set the mood, dim those lights, turn on that trusty little fan for some soothing background noise, and get all snuggled up. Laugh. So tonight we're going on a journey with a man who went from bankruptcy to building a noodle empire, one delicious bowl at a time. So just take a deep breath, let go of the day's worries, and let this whole story carry you off to a really peaceful slumber. Hey there, sleepyheads. Let's dive into the wild ride of a guy who went from rock bottom to the top of Japan. Wealth ladder, all thanks to a bowl of noodles. Sounds so crazy, right? Well, buckle up, because like his story, it's got more twists than a pretzel left. Our hero, his name, let's call him Mr. Noodle for now. Laugh, just uncut, because trust me, it'll take a while before that nickname actually makes sense. He started his adult life with big dreams, like most of us do. The whole I am gonna change the world and make millions kind of deal. Problem was he had more enthusiasm than business sense. His first venture, Laugh, a tiny electronics shop. Picture this, a cramped store in a less than bustling part of town, filled with random gadgets that nobody really asked for. Laugh, he thought he'd just hit the jackpot by importing some revolutionary calculators from overseas. Spoiler alert, they were just like regular calculators. Customers walked by, gave the store a pity glance, and kept going. Within 6 months, his dreams of being the next tech mogul went down the drain, along with his entire savings. But hey, failure, laugh, just like a learning opportunity, right? At least, so that's what Mr. Noodle told himself as he dusted off his pride and jumped into his second business, uncut trendy clothing store. He stocked up on all the latest fashion trends, or so he thought. Turns out what he thought were cutting edge styles were actually like last season. So rejects the store. Was like a ghost town, and his bank account was bleeding red faster than you can say. Out of style, another year, another bankruptcy. Did you think he'd call it quits, right? Laugh. But nope, Mr. Noodle was convinced that the third time was the charm. He poured his remaining resources into a small cafe, thinking that food was just like the way to go. Bad news? His menu was like a hodgepodge of random dishes, and the coffee tasted like it was brewed from old socks. It was no surprise when the cafe shut its doors a few months later, leaving him with a mountain of debt and 3 strikes against his name. At this point, you might be wondering how on earth this guy could come back from this. But here says the thing about rock bottom. Laugh. Uncle, there's only one way to go, and that side. And as we will see in the next chapter, a pretty simple bowl of noodles was about to turn his entire life around. Sweet dreams. And just stay tuned for the next part of this wild story. All right, sleepy story seekers, after Mr. Noodle says triple bankruptcy disaster, just think things couldn't get worse. Well, hold on to your pillows, because the real storm was brewing at home. When he first started chasing his business dreams, his wife had been supportive, or at least tried to be. She'd listen to his wild ideas, offer a few words of encouragement, and even really helped out with some of the grunt work in his failing ventures. But 3 failed businesses in a row. Laugh. That was definitely a lot to take. The house, once filled with the excited chatter of future plans, now echoed with tense silences and heated arguments. His wife would look at him with a mix of frustration and disappointment, saying things like, "Oh, when are you going to get a real job? We can just keep living like this." And who could blame her? So bills were piling up. The kids were starting to notice that they couldn't have the things their friends did. And the stress was suffocating. Mr. Noodle would try to defend himself, saying that he was just one good idea away from hitting it so big, but his words sounded hollow, even to himself. He'd come home late, avoiding his family, disappointed stares, only to lie awake at night, his mind racing with thoughts of how he'd just let everyone down. The fights got worse. There were days when they'd barely speak to each other, and the air in the house was so thick with tension so you could cut with a knife. His kids, too young to fully understand what was going on, would watch their parents' arguments with wide, worried eyes, just adding another layer of guilt to Mr. Noodleson's already heavy conscience. It wasn't just about the money, though. That was a huge part of it. It was just about broken promises, dashed hopes, and just the feeling that their once happy family was falling apart. Mr. Noodle knew he had to do something, but at that moment, with his confidence at an all-time low and his options running out, he felt completely lost. So little did he know that a simple, humble bowl of noodles would soon be like the life preserver that pulled him and his family out of this stormy sea. All right, let's pick up where we left off with Mr. Noodle, who's now in the middle of a full-blown life crisis, with his family on the verge of falling apart and his bank account emptier than an abandoned vending machine. He sat facing a problem that hits so close to home for all of us. How to feed himself when there's just barely any money left. Picture this, it's like a cold, rainy evening in Tokyo. Mr. Noodle is wandering the streets, his stomach growling louder than the passing trains. He stopped wearing the same wrinkled suit like he's been recycling for weeks, and his shoes are so worn out so you can almost see his toes peeking through. He's still looking for something, anything, to fill his belly, but every restaurant and food stall he passes by might as well be a million miles away. So the prices on the menus, they might as well just be written in a foreign language, just like completely out of reach. He tries to convince himself that he's not that hungry, so that he can just wait it out until things get better. But let's say just be real hunger.
Doesn't care about your financial situation or your pride.
His mind starts playing tricks on him, imagining the smell of freshly baked bread, like the sizzle of a juicy steak, and then his nose catches a whiff of something like a warm, savory aroma that makes his mouth water. Following the scent, like a cartoon character chasing a pie, he finds himself in front of a tiny hole, in like the wall noodle stand. The owner, an old man with a kind face, is busy stirring a huge pot of broth, the steam rising up and creating a little cloud around him. Mr. Noodle's eyes lock onto the bowls of noodles being served to the customers. They look so simple, yet so delicious, like literally like slender strands of noodles floating in a rich broth, topped with a slice of tender meat and some fresh green onion. But here's the kicker. He doesn't have enough money to buy even the cheapest bowl. He just stands there, awkwardly shifting from foot to foot, as the owner looks at him with a really curious expression. Mr. Noodle can feel the heat rising in his cheeks, the embarrassment of his situation hitting him like a ton of bricks. He mumbles something about just looking and starts to walk away, his stomach protesting loudly, so little does he know. So just this simple moment of hunger and humiliation is about to be the spark that lights the fire for his future empire. So there's Senna Noodle slinking away from that tantalizing noodle stand with his tail between his legs. But that aroma of the noodles, it's so like a catchy song that just one leave your head, laugh, just as he trudges through the dimly lit streets. His mind is still fixated on that warm, comforting bowl, like he couldn't afford. He starts to think, oh, why is it that something so simple can be so irresistible? Yeah, he's been chasing these big, flashy business ideas, like on-call, fancy electronics, trendy clothes, a hip cafe, and yet here he is, drooling over a bowl of noodles. It sounds like a light bulb goes off in his head, and it's not just any light bulb, it's a neon sign that screams Eureka. Suddenly, all those failed business attempts start to make sense in a strange way. Maybe he's been going about it all wrong. Maybe, just maybe, the key to success isn't in these top complicated venture. Maybe it's sell it in something as humble and universal as a bowl of noodles. After all, everyone eats, right? Laugh, and who doesn't love a good bowl of noodles on a cold day or when they were feeling down? He starts to imagine all the possibilities. He could create his own unique blend of broth, experiment with different types of noodles, come up with toppings that no one has ever seen before. He pictures people lining up outside his own noodle stand just like he'd done earlier, but this time, they'd not be waiting for his noodles. As he walks, he's also lost in his thoughts that he almost bumps into a lamppost. But he doesn't just even notice. He just got too busy mentally jotting down ideas for his new business. He thinks about how he can make it affordable for everyone, just like that noodle stand, like he'd pass by. He really wants to create something that brings people joy, so that fills not just their stomachs, but also their heart. This isn't just a random thought. It's a full-blown epiphany. And as he finally reaches his front door, so tired, but with a newfound sense of purpose, he knows that this time things are going to be different. That simple, unattainable bowl of noodles has always just become the blueprint for his future success. Now all he has to do is turn his dreams into reality. With his new noodle-centric dream in mind, Mr. Noodle wasted no time getting to work. The only problem, his kitchen was more like a glorified closet. It was tiny with a rickety stove that looked like it was just one gust of wind away from falling apart, and cabinets filled with nothing but expired spices and half-empty jars. But hey, laugh, just desperate times call for desperate measures, right? He started by doing some kind of research, or at least as much as he could on a shoestring budget. He borrowed books from the local library about noodle making, scoured the internet on the public computers at the community center, and even asked around at the local markets for tips on the best ingredients. And then the real fun just began. Laugh, sort of like onto the experiments. His first attempt at making broth was let's just say it was a disaster. He threw together a random assortment of vegetables, bones, and spices, thinking that more was better. The result, a murky, foul-smelling liquid that looked like something you'd find in a swamp. Laugh, so he just took a hesitant sip and immediately spat it out, his face contorted in disgust as he realized he had a long way to go. But Mr. Noodle wasn't one to give up easily. He tried again this time, following a recipe he'd just found in an old cookbook. He carefully measured out each ingredient, watching the pot like a hawk as the broth just simmered. But when he tasted it, it was so bland, like drinking warm water with a hint of sadness. He added more salt, then more pepper, then a splash of soy sauce. But nothing seemed to make it so right. The noodle making process was no easier. His first batch came out lumpy and sticky, more like a tangled mass of dough than actual noodles. He tried rolling them out thinner, but they kept breaking. He adjusted the flour to kind of water ratio, but then they were too dry and crumbly. It was like a never-ending cycle of failure. But amidst all these setbacks, there were small glimmers of hope. Every now and then he'd get a hint of a great flavor in the broth, or maybe a noodle would turn out just the right kind of texture. And those tiny victories were enough to keep him going, stirring pots and kneading dough late into the night, determined to crack the code of the perfect bowl of noodles. After countless hours of slaving away in his tiny makeshift kitchen, Mr. Noodle finally felt ready to take his noodles to the streets. He'd managed to scrounge up enough money to rent a small rickety cart and some sort of basic equipment. With his heart pounding in his chest and a nervous excitement coursing through his veins, he wheeled his cart to a busy street corner, hoping to attract some kind of customers. He set up shop early in the morning, arranging his bowls and utensils neatly and turning on the burner to keep his broth warm. He'd spent days perfecting his recipe, and he was so convinced that his noodles were going to be a hit. He even came up with a catchy little slogan to shout out to passersby, "Oh, the most delicious noodles in town. One bite and you'll be hooked." But as the morning turned into afternoon, his enthusiasm started to wane. People would glance at his cart as they walked by, give him a polite smile, and then just keep going. Some would stop and look at his menu, but then they shake their heads and move on. He could not figure out what he was doing wrong. Was it the location? Was his cart too unremarkable? Or were his noodles just not as good as he thought? Desperate to attract some customers, he started offering free samples. He'd just scoop up a small portion of noodles in a tiny cup and just hold it out to people, but most of them would just wave him off or take a polite sip and then hand the cup back, saying they weren't too interested. By the end of the day, he'd only sold a handful of bowls, and the money he made didn't. So he even come close to covering the cost of his ingredients and the cart rental. As he packed up his cart in the evening, feeling defeated and dejected, he couldn't help but wonder if he'd made a huge mistake. Had he just been too naive to think that he could succeed where he failed so many times before? But deep down, a small part of him refused to give up. He knew that he had something special with his noodles, so he just needed to figure out how to make the whole world see it too. Just like when Mr. Noodle was starting to think his noodle venture was doomed to fail, like his previous businesses, something unexpected happened. It was like a slow, drizzly day, and he was standing behind his nearly empty cart, feeling sorry for himself. Business had been even worse than usual, and he was seriously considering calling it quits. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw a familiar face approaching. It was a young office worker who just passed by his cart. A few days ago, Mr. Noodle remembered him because he'd been one of the few who actually stopped to look at the menu, although he hadn't bought anything at the time. This whole time, though, the man walked right up to the cart and said, "Oh, I'll have a bowl of your special noodles, please." Mr. Noodle was stunned. He quickly got to work, boiling the noodles, ladling out the broth, and adding the toppings with slightly shaky hands. As he handed the bowl over, he watched nervously as the man took his first bite. To his surprise, the man's eyes lit up, and he just let out a satisfied, "These are just amazing," the man exclaimed between mouthfuls. "I've been thinking about them ever since I saw your cards, so I had to come back and give them a try, and Mr. Noodle couldn't. Hard to believe his ears. It was someone who actually liked his noodles enough to come back for more." Over the next few minutes, the two of them chatted. The office worker gave Mr. Noodle some feedback, suggesting just a few small changes to the broth that he thought might just make it even better. Mr. Noodle listened intently, taking mental notes. Before he left, the man promised to tell his colleagues about the delicious noodles, and Mr. Noodle felt like a glimmer of hope reigniting inside him. That one customer, that one small act of kindness and appreciation was like a ray of sunshine breaking through the clouds. It reminded Mr. Noodle that he was on the right track, so that all he needed was a chance to prove himself. And as he watched the man walk away, a new determination filled him. He was always going to make his noodle business work, no matter what. Buoyed by the unexpected appearance of his first repeat customer, Mr. Noodle was fired up to make his noodles even better. But improving the taste wasn't just going to be a walk in the park. So it was more like a marathon through a minefield of failed experiment. He took the office worker's suggestions to heart and dived headfirst into a whirlwind of recipe tweaks. First up was the broth, so he started by tinkering with the base ingredient. He tried using different types of bones, like beef, pork, chicken, even a combination of all three. Each batch simmered for hours on end, filling his tiny kitchen with a medley of aromas, some sort of heavenly, others not so much. One time, he got a little too ambitious and decided to add a handful of exotic spices he picked up from a local market. Big mistake, the resulting broth smelled like a mix between like an old gym sock and a forgotten science experiment. He gagged as he took a sip and just immediately dumped the entire pot down the drain. The noodles themselves were another challenge. He experimented with different flours, wheat, rice, buckwheat, and adjusted the amount of water and salt in the dough. Sometimes the noodles came out too chewy, like chewing on rubber bands. Other times they were so soft they just fell apart in the broth, turning into a mushy mess. But Mr. Noodle was nothing if not persistent. He kept a detailed notebook, jotting down every ingredient, every adjustment, and every result, good or bad. He even started conducting his own mini taste tests, so inviting his skeptical neighbors over to sample his creations. Their honest and sometimes brutally frank feedback stung a little, but it also gave him really valuable insights. There were countless late nights spent hunched over the stove, stirring pots, kneading dough, and tasting spoonful after spoonful of broth. There were moments when he wanted to throw in the towel, when the endless failures seemed like too much to bear. But then he'd think of that one customer who'd come back, and he'd find the strength to kind of keep going. Slowly but surely. He was getting closer to the perfect bowl of noodle. After weeks of tireless tinkering and tasting, Mr. Noodle's efforts began to pay off. That one loyal customer wasn't just a one-off anymore. Word started to spread, slowly but surely, like a gentle ripple in a pond. It began with the office worker bringing a couple of his colleagues to the noodle cart. They were initially skeptical, just eyeing the humble setup with raised eyebrow. But one slurp of Mr. Noodle's cess improved broth, and their expressions transformed from doubt to delight. "This is way better than the fancy noodle place near the office," one of them exclaimed, and Mr. Noodle felt like a huge grin spread across his whole face. Before he knew it, there were small groups of people stopping by regularly. Some were office workers on their lunch break. Others were students looking for an affordable and delicious meal. They'd just huddle around the cart, just chatting and laughing as they devoured their bowls of noodle. Mr. Noodle started to recognize familiar faces, and he do greet them by name. He even began to remember their usual orders, adding an extra slice of meat or a sprinkle more of their favorite topping. It wasn't tapa, a long line snaking down the block, but it was just something. Local shopkeepers, who'd previously given him pitying looks, now nodded in approval as they passed by. A few even became customers like themselves. One old lady who owned a nearby flower shop would stop by every afternoon, saying his noodles reminded her of the ones like her grandmother used to make. Mr. Noodle's cart still looked as rickety as ever, and he was still operating on a shoestring budget, but there was a new energy around it. So the once empty cart now had a faint buzz of activity, with the sound of happy munching and the occasional compliment filling the air. It was like a far cry from the early days of complete silence and disappointment, and for Mr. Noodle, it was like a sign that he might just be on to something big. Just when Mr. Noodle thought he'd finally turned the corner, fate decided to throw another curveball his way. Buoyed by the growing popularity of his noodle cart, he got a little too ambitious. He started thinking really big, instead of slowly expanding his business. He decided to take a huge leap. So he leased a small storefront in a more upscale part of town, thinking that a proper restaurant would attract even more customers. He spent every last penny he had on renovations, new equipment, and hiring a small staff. He even splurged on a fancy new sign, just hoping to make a statement. At first, things seemed to be going well. The new location brought in some curious passers-by, and the shiny new setup just gave the impression of a successful business. But Mr. Noodle had underestimated a few crucial things. The rent in the new area was sky really high, and the cost of ingredients and labor had increased significantly. To make matters worse, he soon realized that running a full-fledged restaurant was a whole different ballgame than a simple noodle cart. There were permits to deal with staff management issues, and a much larger customer base to satisfy. His inexperienced staff made mistakes, so orders got mixed up and customers started leaving negative reviews. As the weeks went by, the money started to dry up. He was barely making enough to cover the expenses, let alone turn a profit. So creditors started knocking on his door, demanding payment for the loans he'd taken out for the expansion. Despite his best efforts to cut costs and improve the business, it was all just in vain. In a cruel twist of fate, just a few months after opening the restaurant, Mr. Noodle was forced to close its doors. He was once again declared bankrupt, and like just this time, the failure hit even harder. He then not only lost his new business, but also all the progress he'd made with the noodle cart as he sat in the empty, silent restaurant, surrounded by unpaid bills and broken dreams. He wondered if he'd ever be able to just kind of bounce back. With his second bankruptcy, Mr. Noodle's world seemed to crumble even further. The few rays of hope that had started to shine through after the initial success of his noodle cart were now extinguished, replaced by a thick cloud of despair. And as if that wasn't just enough, the reaction from his friends and family just made the pain even more unbearable. His so-called friends, who had once patted him on the back and offered empty words of encouragement, so now avoided him like the plague. So phone calls went unanswered and invitations to social gatherings stopped coming. When he did run into them on the street, they would give him awkward smiles and quickly make up excuses to leave. It was as if his failure was contagious and they didn't just want to be anywhere near it. His extended family was no better. There were whispers behind his back, snide comments about his, reckless business decisions and suggestions that he should just give up and get a, real job. One particularly harsh relative even said, "Oh, I always knew he was a dreamer. He should have listened to us and stayed in a safe, stable job instead of chasing these silly ideas." His wife, who had stood by him through the first few failures, was at her wit's end. The constant financial stress, the disappointment of yet another failed venture, and the pressure from their families had just taken a toll on their whole relationship. Arguments became more frequent and more heated, and there were moments when it felt like the love and support that had once held them together was just slipping away. Mr. Noodle felt completely alone. He had always believed in his dreams, but now surrounded by the cold shoulder of those he cared about. And the harsh reality of his whole situation, he started to question everything. Was he really just a naive dreamer? Was it just time to finally give up on his noodle business and admit defeat? But deep down, a small part of him still refused to be beaten. Despite the overwhelming odds and the painful isolation, he knew that he wasn't ready to throw in the towel just yet. Even when the world seemed to turn its back on him, Mr. Noodle's obsession with noodles only grew stronger. While friends crossed the street to avoid him and family members rolled their eyes at his useless dream, he retreated to the one place that had never failed him, just on his tiny cluttered kitchen. This time, though, his experiments had a totally different flavor. There was a quiet desperation in every batch of broth, a stubbornness in every knead of dough. He'd spend hours hunched over the stove, stirring a pot of bones and vegetables until his arms ached, or testing noodle textures by pinching them between his fingers. Once his wife found him at 3 a.m.
squinting at a cookbook by the light of a single bulb.
Can't you just let this go? Oh, she just asked one evening, watching him scrape burnt broth from the bottom of a pot. His hands were covered in flour, and there was a stain on his shirt from some experimental spice mix, but instead of answering, he held up a spoonful of broth with a determined glint in his eye. "Just try this," he said. "I think I am onto something." That something was a refusal to accept defeat. He learned from the restaurant disaster, just sort of he knew now that flashy storefronts and big loans weren't the answer. The magic was in the noodles themselves. So he went back to basics, researching ancient noodle recipes from across Japan, even sneaking into a local culinary school's library to read forbidden texts. Maybe just old cookbooks. He tried making noodles with sweet potato starch, with bamboo juice, even with just a dash of sake he'd found in the back of the cupboard. Most of these attempts were disasters. One batch of noodles turned blue when he added too much matcha. Another smelled like fish sauce after a misadventure with like fermented soybean. But each failure felt different, sort of like laugh. Until instead of crushing him, they fueled his fire. He started keeping a failure journal, scribbling down every wrong turn so he'd never make it again. And in those late night hours when the house was silent and his only company was the hum of the stove, so something shifted. The obsession wasn't just about making money anymore. It was about proving to himself that he could create something extraordinary from nothing, that a guy who'd failed twice could still have something worth sharing, even if no one else believed in it, yet he really did, and that somehow just felt like enough. One rainy afternoon, Mr. Noodle was in the kitchen, half asleep and fully frustrated. He'd been trying to replicate a rich umami-packed broth he'd tasted in a tiny Kyoto shop years ago, but nothing was working. The bones wouldn't release their flavor, so the soy sauce was too salty, and he'd accidentally knocked over a jar of miso into the pot. So great, now it's like a salty, muddy mess, he grumbled, scraping the sides of the pot. He was about to dump the whole thing when a knock came at the door. It was the old flower shop lady from down the street carrying a bag of wilted vegetables she'd saved from the trash. "Thought you might need these," she said, just peeking over his shoulder at the murky broth. "Looks like my grandma stew after she forgot it on the stove," she chuckled. Instead of leaving, she reached into her apron and pulled out a small jar. "It's my secret ingredient," laughed, sort of like uncut dried bonito flakes, "but I toast them first." She sprinkled a handful into the pot, and something magical happened. The steam suddenly smelled like the ocean at sunrise, warm and rich. Mr. Noodle took a cautious sip, laughed. The miso saltiness had mellowed, the bonito added a smoky depth, and the wilted veggies like carrots and onions like unca had somehow sweetened the whole thing. It wasn't just good. It was the kind of broth that makes you close your eyes and sigh. That sent it, he whispered, staring at the pot, like it literally held the secrets of the whole universe. So the next few days were a blur of testing. He toasted bonito flakes until they were almost charred, mixed them with miso paste made from locally sourced soybeans, and added a splash of dashi he'd been saving for emergencies. For the noodles, he tried a new technique, sort of like letting the dough rest for 24 hours in the fridge, which gave them a springy texture like he'd never achieved before. One night, he just invited the flower shop lady and his skeptical wife to a taste test. His wife approached the bowl warily, but one slurp later, her eyes widened. This is actually good," she said, almost shocked. The flower shop lady nodded, spooning up the last drop. "You need to sell this tomorrow." Mr. Noodle looked at the bowl, then at the two women. The recipe had come from a mistake, like a donation of wilted veggies, and like a neighbor miskindness. It wasn't tea perfect, but it was unique. Laugh, sort of like uncooked, and it tasted like hope. Maybe success wasn't true about grand plans or fancy restaurants. Maybe it was about trusting the process, even when it felt like you were stirring a pot of failures. With his new secret recipe in hand, Mr. Noodle rented a tiny patch of sidewalk near a busy train station. This time, he did tea splurge on a flashy cart. Laugh, just like uncut. Just a weathered wooden table, a portable stove, and a hand-painted sign that read, "Noodle Magic, try me." He half expected the same crickets as before, but something was different this time. The first morning, he started simmering the broth, and within minutes, the aroma of toasted bonito and miso began to weave through the crowd. Commuters paused mid-stride, sniffing the air like bloodhounds. A salaryman in a wrinkled suit stopped and said, "Oh, what's that smell? It's so..." Laugh like my grandma's out kitchen. Mr. Noodle served him a bowl, holding his breath as the man took a bite. "Oh my God," the salaryman said with his mouth full. "Oh, I need 5 more bowls for my office." Okay, maybe not 5, but he did buy 2 to go, and word spread faster than a viral cat video. By lunchtime, there was a line of people stretching around the corner. Laugh like uncooked office workers. students, even a few skeptical food bloggers. One blogger, a young woman with neon pink hair, filmed herself slurping the noodles. Normally, I hate street food. She said between bites, obviously, but this broth is like a warm hug from a Japanese grandma who knows how to party. Her video got thousands of views overnight, and the next day the line was just twice as long. Mr. Noodle worked like a madman, boiling noodles, ladling broth, and cracking jokes with customers. He remembered everyone. Some names, asked about their days, and even just started a whole noodle of the week special. One old man came every day, saying the noodles reminded him of his wife, who just not passed away. "You make me feel less lonely," he told Mr. Noodle, who almost dropped a bowl of broth. Profit well. He was still making pennies compared to a real restaurant, but for the first time, he was making more than he spent. He reinvested like every yen into better ingredients. Laugh, like organic vegetables, free-range chicken for the broth, even handmade noodles from a local artisan. The quality showed, and so did the smiles on his customers' faces. One evening, as he was cleaning up, the salaryman from day one stopped by with a gift left just like that uncut tiny ceramic noodle bowl. "You changed my lunch game," he said. Mr. Noodle held the bowl, feeling something he hadn't felt in years, not just hope, but proof that his crazy noodle dream was actually working. The plan game wasn't just about money, it was about connecting with people, one bowl at a time. Just when Mr. Noodle was getting used to his little line of regulars, the universe decided to throw him a curveball, this time like in the form of a local newspaper reporter. The neon-haired food blogger, Savio, had caught the eye of a journalist named Miss Tanaka, who just showed up one rainy morning with a camera crew, umbrella in one hand, and just notepad in the other. "Mind if we do a story on your noodles?" "Oh," she asked, eyeing the steamy pot. Mr. Noodle, still in his apron splattered with broth, almost choked on his own tongue. "Me, but I am just a guy with a cart." But Miss Tanaka was already snapping photos of the hand-painted sign and interviewing the flower shop lady, who just stopped by to say hello. The article that ran the next day was a game changer, titled "Just from Bankruptcy to Bowl." The noodle man who refused to quit it told Mr. Noodle's whole story, laughed just like Unka from the 3 failed businesses to the midnight kitchen experiments, complete with a photo of him grinning behind his cart. The journalist had a knack for turning his struggles into a David Views Goliath tale, and readers ate it up. Overnight, the tiny noodle cart became a local celebrity. People came from across the city waving the newspaper clipping and asking for tea. The bankruptcy noodles, bankruptcy noodles, which somehow sounded cooler in Japanese. The line stretched for blocks, blocking traffic and annoying nearby shop owners. But Mr. Noodle was too busy serving bowls to care. A television crew soon followed, filming a segment where Mr. Noodle taught a news anchor how to make his secret broth. Spoiler, the anchor almost set the cart on fire. Social media just exploded with number noodlemen and number never up hashtags, and suddenly his little wooden table was like the most talked about eatery in town. But here's the funny thing, Mr. Noodle hated the attention. He'd duck behind the cart when cameras showed up, and once hid in a nearby alley when a magazine really wanted a photo shoot. "I just want to make noodles," he grumbled to the flower shop lady, but she smacked him on the arm. "Idiot, this is like your chance. Use it to spread the noodle love." She was right, of course. The media frenzy didn't just bring customers, so it brought something more valuable, like just uncredibility. Investors started sending emails. Restaurants wanted to collaborate, and even a few big-name brands asked about licensing his recipe. But Mr. Noodle turned them all down. For now, he was so happy with his cart, his regulars, and the knowledge that a few kind words in the newspaper had turned his little noodle dream into something so much big. With the media buzz dying down, Mr. Noodle could have gone back to his quiet life of noodle making. But something had shifted. The constant stream of customers just laugh. Now including people who traveled from neighboring cities. Uncup made it clear this wasn't just a cart anymore. It was becoming just a thing. So he did the last thing anyone expected. So he got organized. He started by designing a simple logo, laugh, like just a steaming bowl with a smiling face, drawn by the flower shop lady's granddaughter. He had it printed on tiny paper napkins and used them to wrap chopsticks, turning every order into a little gift. So customers started taking selfies with the napkins. So tagging number Noodle Smile on social media. Next, he hired a part-timer, a college student who'd been regular since day one. Together, laugh. They brainstormed a menu that went beyond the special noodles. So until there was the morning pick-me-up with extra ginger, the rainy day comfort with extra thick noodles, and even a noodle burrito for adventurous eaters. Don't ask. But it involved wrapping noodles in a tortilla. Mr. Noodle also started thinking about consistency. He measured out the broth ingredients in precise grams, created a timeline for how long each batch should simmer, and even bought a small scale to weigh the noodles. It says not just cooking anymore. He told his part-timer, it says a whole science. With extra umami. The flower shop lady, now his unofficial business advisor, suggested he start selling jars of his secret broth. Mix, people can just always come to the cart, she said. Let them take the magic home. So Mr. Noodle spent weekends filling recycled glass jars with dried bonito flakes, powdered miso, and a little handwritten note, add hot water and stir smile optional but recommended. To his surprise, the jars flew off the shelf, which was just a cardboard box. People started posting photos of their at-home noodle bowls, tagging him and using his logo. Without even realizing it, Mr. Noodle had created a brand. It wasn't a flashy or corporate laugh, sort of like so uncared. It was just him, his cart, and a bunch of people who loved noodles, but that was exactly the point. One evening, as he was labeling jaws by the light of a street lamp, the part-timer said, yeah, maybe we should call this place something like Noodle Magic or something. Mr. Noodles smiled, looking at the line of jars with their little smiling logos. Maybe the kid was onto something. Maybe the brand was still tiny, still rooted in a rickety cart, but it had a heartbeat. And maybe that heartbeat was just made of broth noodles and a whole lot of stubbornness. Just when Mr. Noodle thought he just finally cracked the code, so the universe decided to play its cruelest trick. Yet the success of his noodle cart had caught the eye of a slick talking investor named Mr. Takahashi, who promised to turn Noodle Magic into a nationwide chain. Imagine 100 stores by next year, he said, waving around like glossy blueprints of a modern noodle empire. Mr. Noodle was hesitant, laugh, he learned his lesson from the restaurant disaster, but the flower shop lady convinced him. Oh, you can keep serving from a cart forever. Think of all the people who need your noodles. So he took the plunge, signing away a whole chunk of his business and pouring every yen into the first fancy noodle magic restaurant. It was a disaster from day one. The investor cut corners on ingredients, hired inexperienced staff, and forced Mr. Noodle to use pre-made broth mixes that actually tasted like plastic. We need to scale. Laugh, Mr. Takahashi barked as customers complained about the watered-down noodles. Within 6 months, 3 stores had opened like Unka, and all 3 were hemorrhaging money. Then the real bomb dropped. Mr. Takahashi had been embezzling funds, and the company was suddenly $500,000 in debt. Creditors swarmed the restaurants, padlocking doors and seizing equipment. Mr. Noodle found himself standing in front of a closed store, holding a stack of unpaid bills, his name plastered across the news as, oh, the failed noodle-like man. This time the failure was nuclear. He did not only lost his business, but also betrayed the trust of his loyal customers. The flower shop lady didn't answer his calls, and the whole part-timer quit saying, yeah, I thought you were different. Even the ceramic noodle bowl the salaryman had given him got broken in the chaos. Alone in his empty kitchen, Mr. Noodle stared at the jar of secret broth. Mixie kept for emergencies. Free bankruptcies 3 times. He'd have been knocked down. He poured himself a glass of cheap sake and thought about quitting for good. Maybe his family was right. Sort of Kit. Maybe he was just a dreamer who couldn't face reality. But then he remembered something. So the first time he served a bowl of noodles to that office worker, the way the man's face had lit up, or maybe the old man who D said the noodles made him feel less lonely, was all that just a fluke? Or was there something real here, something worth fighting for? Laugh, uncut, even if it meant fighting himself. He took a sip of sake, then another. Outside, the rain started to fall, just like the day he first stumbled on the noodle stand. Maybe this was rock bottom, but as he'd learned before, like there's only one way to go from here. After the third bankruptcy, Mr. Noodle spent 3 days in his kitchen, wearing the same socks, drinking cold tea, and staring at a wall. His reflection in the window looked like a deflated balloon, like uncaggy eyes, like messy hair, and a permanent frown. But on the 4th day, something snapped. He chucked the empty sake bottle into the recycling bin and muttered twice, Okay, universe, you win, but I'm still making like noodles. Get the core secret kitsch. Bouncing back wasn't a fancy strategy or a new investor. It was stupidly simple. So he went back to the basics, like just laugh. Unclearly, he dug out his old notebook filled with failed recipes and circled the one thing that had never let him down. The handwritten page from the flower shop lady's bonito trick. No more corporate nonsense, no more shortcuts. Just good, honest noodles made with his own 2 hands. First, he sold his only valuable possession, like just laugh. Uncle, a vintage rice cooker, just to buy a used food truck. It was rusty and smelled like old French fries, but it had wheels and a stove. So he parked it in front of the same train station, hung up a hand-painted sign that said daily back to basics noodles hold, and started simmering broth like it was just his last meal on earth. This time he had a new rule. No partners, no investors, no bullshit. He did everything himself, like just like that for on driving the truck to the spot, even cleaning the grease traps. When customers asked about the fancy restaurants, he'd shrug and say, they sucked anyway. My noodles are better here. But the real secret was in how he connected with people. He started Oedipus Noodle Therapy running session every Friday where customers could pay with a story instead of money. One guy talked about losing his job, another cried over a broken heart. Mr. Noodle just listened, served them a bowl, and said, daily life's like noodles, laugh like sort of uncut. Sometimes it's messy, but add a little broth and it's okay. Daily word spread, not just about the noodles though. They were better than ever, but about the guy in the rusty truck who listened. Journalists came back, but this time, Mr. Noodle didn't hide. He showed them his tiny kitchen, his stack of thank you notes from customers, and a chipped ceramic bowl he'd glued back together, going like, this is the real noodle magic when laugh, he said, holding up like a spoonful of broth. The goal's secret notes wasn't a recipe or a business plan. It was remembering why he started in the first place, to make people feel less alone, like one bowl at a time. And as the line grew longer outside the rusty truck, Mr. Noodle realized that sometimes hitting rock bottom isn't just a dead end. Laugh. Sort of like it's just a chance to build something real. So from the ground up, with his rusty food truck and a renewed sense of purpose, Mr. Noodle began to rebuild his noodle empire. Laugh, uncle, one humble bowl at a time. This time, he had no grand plans for nationwide chains or flashy restaurants. Instead, he focused on what he did best, creating an unforgettable noodle experience that touched people. So like Psy Hearts. He started by expanding his noodle therapy sessions, turning them into small community gatherings where customers could not only share their stories, but also help prepare the noodle. It wasn't uncommon to see a Salaraman chopping vegetables next to a retired teacher, both laughing over a pot of simmering broth. The food truck became more than just a place to eat, so it was like a hub for connection. As demand grew, Mr. Noodle reluctantly hired a small team like Uncle, all people he'd met as regular customers who shared his vision together. They brainstormed ways to scale without losing the personal kind of touch. They opened a second food truck. Then a third, each operated by someone who'd been through their own struggles and understood the importance of serving noodles with kindness. They began offering noodle kits for people to make at home. complete with handwritten recipes and a note from Mr. Noodle. Remember, even if your noodles fall apart, the broth is still delicious. The kits became a hit, especially with busy parents and homesick students who appreciated the little bit of warmth and nostalgia they brought. Slowly but surely, the whole Noodle Magic brand just began to grow in a sustainable way. They opened a few small, cozy restaurants that felt like an extension of Mr. Noodle's set kitchen. Sort of no fancy decor, just wooden tables, mismatched chairs, and the smell of fresh broth. Each restaurant had a wall where customers could write their stories, creating a patchwork of human experiences that greeted every new visitor. Mr. Noodle himself remained hands-on, often visiting the trucks and restaurants to chat with customers and lend a hand in the kitchen. He turned down countless offers from investors, preferring to grow organically and keep the business true to its roots. I am not in the noodle business, he did say. I am in the happiness business. Noodles just so happen to be the way I deliver. Years went by, and what started as a rusty food truck on a street corner had become sort of like a beloved brand with a loyal following. But through it all, Mr. Noodle never forgot the lessons of his 3 bankruptcies. He kept his business simple, his ingredients fresh, and his heart open. And as the sort of noodle magic empire continued to grow, it remained a testament to the power of perseverance, kindness, and a really, really good bowl of noodle.
It's wild to think that the guy who once scrounged for change to buy a bowl of noodles would one day top Japan's rich lists. But here, said the kicker, when Mr. Noodle, who finally let the world know his real name, Momofuku Ando. But let's just be real.
Yeah,
Noodle stuck, made his first billion, so he didn't buy a private jet or a mansion. He just opened a nonprofit to teach kids how to make noodles, laugh, unkin life lessons, unkin his old rusty food truck. See, by the time he became Japan's richest man, Noodle Magic had evolved into a global brand with stores in 37 countries. There were instant noodle versions, though he swore they'd never replace fresh, noodle-themed cookbooks, even like a Netflix docuseries, where he traveled the whole world, serving noodles to people from all walks of life. But every time a reporter asks about his billions, he'd point to a photo on his desk. It was like the first customer, like that office worker smiling over a bowl of noodles. That's the real wealth, he do say. Of course, there were perks. He got to meet the Prime Minister, who awkwardly tried to slurp noodles on live television. He was offered a cameo in a Godzilla movie, so he turned it down, saying, "Oh, I'd rather be eaten by noodles than a monster." Laugh, but his favorite thing, every year, on the anniversary of his first bankruptcy, he de-parked the original rusty truck outside that same train station, serving free noodles to anyone who'd just listened to his story. I failed 3 times, he detailed the crowd, ladling broth into chipped bowls each time I thought it was the end. But then I remember, like a bowl of noodles is just flour, like water and time. Same as life, laugh. You gotta knead the dough, let it rest, and trust that the broth will simmer. Kids would roll their eyes at the cheesy metaphor, but old timers who did that in there from the start would nod, knowing he wasn't just talking about noodle. On his 85th birthday, he threw a giant noodle party in Tokyo, inviting every customer who'd ever written him a thank you. Note, there were thousands of people, from salarymen to homeless folks, all sharing bowls and stories. Somewhere in the crowd, the flower shop lady, now in a wheelchair, yelled, "Yeah, told you so," and he laughed until he cried. When he passed away, a few years later, his will specified that his fortune be used to fund noodle kitchens in underserved communities. But the real legacy, it's not in the billions or the brand laugh. It's as in every time someone makes a bowl of noodles too salty, remembers Mr. Noodle's sauce story, and adds a little extra love to fix it, because at the end of the day, maybe the whole world, the richest man, wasn't about money. So sort of like a guy who proved that even when life serves you lemons, you can make a damn good bowl of noodles. As the night deepens, the cicadas outside fade into a gentle white noise. Mr. Noodle That story is like a bowl of freshly cooked noodles. Laugh, sort of like uncut, steaming hot with the smoke and fire of life when it's served. But when it cools, you taste the lingering sweetness of perseverance. 3 times he hit rock bottom, yet he used a bowl of noodles to prop up his entire world. This isn't taught about teaching you to become a tycoon, but to show that those moments when life seems hopeless might just hide that little secret. So recipe years haven't discovered yet. Right now, as you curl up under the covers listening to this story, tomorrow, as sunrise might filter through the curtains like green onions sprinkled over soup, laugh like just like laugh, UV break, just perfect.